We begin with a major escalation between the U.S. and Venezuela. The U.S. seized a large oil tanker off the coast of the South American country. Attorney General Pam Bondi shared this video on social media. You'll see U.S. forces propelling down from helicopters, then searching the vessel. Bondi wrote the U.S. had sanctioned the tanker due to its, quote, involvement in an illicit oil shipping network supporting foreign terrorist organizations, end quote. President Trump first announced the seizure yesterday.
We've just seized a tanker on the coast of Venezuela, a large tanker, very large. It was seized for a very good reason. I guess so. We're going to keep the oil.
CBS News correspondent Natalie Brand kicks us off from the White House this hour. Natalie, good morning. What do we know about this operation and how is Venezuela responding?
Good morning, Errol. Officials say the operation included U.S. Coast Guard members and also military special forces teams. As you saw in that dramatic footage released by the DOJ, they are seen fast rope boarding from a helicopter onto this vessel. Sources tell CBS that the vessel seized is called the Skipper, sanctioned by the U.S. government in 2022. And Attorney General Pam Bondi, in a statement on social media, alleged that it was used to transport oil from Venezuela and Iran, saying for multiple years the oil tanker has been sanctioned by the U.S. due to involvement in illicit oil shipping networks supporting foreign terrorist organizations. Now, sources tell CBS News that the administration is potentially considering more similar missions, additional seizures. This once again ratchets up the tensions with Venezuela and the Maduro regime, already heightened because of the series of ongoing strikes on alleged boat strikes that we've seen. Now, Venezuela's government in a new statement said, quote, it strongly denounces and repudiates what it says constitutes shameless robbery and an act of international piracy. Errol.
All right, Natalie, thank you very much. For analysis of this, we're joined now by Will Freeman. He's a fellow for Latin American Studies at the Council on Foreign Relations. Will, good morning. For months, we've been watching this increase in pressure from the U.S. on Venezuela and Nicolas Maduro. I just want to play for our viewers what President Trump had to say about him to Politico earlier this week.
You want to see him out?
His days are numbered.
Can you rule out an American ground invasion?
I don't want to rule in or out. I don't talk about it.
So, Will, what do you make of all of this? Is it really to oust Maduro? If so, is this an effective strategy to achieve that?
I think it likely is about that. I know that the Trump administration has been talking about all this pressure as a sort of counter-narcotics campaign, but you're constantly seeing statements off record by administration officials saying Maduro's days are numbered, he's only leaving office a couple of ways, he better take off now, et cetera. So I do think that that's the goal. I think that's the goal Secretary of State Marco Rubio is very intensely pursuing here. Now, is it working? We don't know yet, honestly, is the unsatisfying answer. It's the regime politics in Venezuela is very opaque. Nicolas Maduro governs the country really with a large number of generals. And the hope is that one of those generals will see the sign of the tide turning here, turn on Maduro and force him to flee the country or arrest him. But honestly, unfortunately, my forecast is pretty pessimistic. This is a regime that knows how to control its own military. The military is infiltrated by spies. Military members who've tried to turn on Maduro before have been tortured. Their families have been kidnapped and disappeared. So I'd imagine that the levels of fear and paranoia are just so great that you're going to have very few high-ranking military members who would take that risk.
So just in our last few seconds, Will, tell me more about your forecast then, because if it is a pressure campaign, Venezuela is an oil-dependent economy. Might we see more seizures of oil vessels? What do you think may happen next?
Well, that's an interesting thing about the pressure campaign this time around, which is that it hasn't come with maximum economic pressure. Right now, the Trump administration has continued a Biden-era license that allows Chevron, the U.S. oil company, to drill in Venezuela. And Chevron's pumping about a third of the oil we see pumped every day. in the country. Now, could Trump escalate there? It's possible, but there are some pretty strong oil industry interests that want normality here, that want a continued relationship with Nicolas Maduro. So we haven't seen him take that step yet. It's also possible that full pressure economic sanctions, really cutting off the oil supply, could increase out migration. And we know that that's another concern for this administration. They don't want that. So I think we'll see. But again, I think unless we're willing to put U.S. boots on the ground, I don't see a transition to an opposition-led government in Venezuela, full stop. Unfortunately, I think we have the dictator Maduro remaining in power, continuing his very oppressive rule. And ultimately, I mean, I think the Trump administration will come to some kind of deal with him and call it success.
All right, Will Freeman, great to get your insight on this. Thanks for joining us this morning.
This military takeover of an oil tanker off Venezuela has raised regional tensions and opened up some potentially serious legal questions. The administration claims the military operation was justified due to prior sanctions on that vessel. The government of Venezuela, as we've mentioned, has called it an act of international piracy and blatant theft. I want to bring in retired Air Force Lieutenant Colonel Rachel Van Blandingham. Thank you, Colonel, for being with us this morning to talk about this. You're also a professor at Southwestern Law School in Los Angeles. So what is your take on the legality regarding this operation broadly? And as I've been pointing out over the last couple of hours, this isn't the first time that the United States has seized a tanker on the high seas. They have done this in the past with, for example, Iran. But is there anything specific about this country and this tanker that could put the United States in some type of legal jeopardy?
Thanks for having me. And no, I don't think the United States is any kind of legal jeopardy. I mean, it's interesting looking at the timing of this operation, right? Because this particular tanker has been under U.S. sanctions since at least 2022. Attorney General Bondi did mention that there was an actual warrant issued by a U.S. federal court for the seizure of this tanker because of its alleged illicit carrying and transportation of oil from sanctioned countries such as Iran. So I don't think this places the United States in any kind of legal jeopardy. What would normally happen is the oil or the tanker itself, the U.S. government would bring this before an admiralty court and for forfeiture proceedings in U.S. federal court. So it's really the timing of this amongst the huge, massive buildup of U.S. forces in the region of Venezuela.
And Colonel, explain to our viewers the choice of using the Coast Guard for this special operation. And as I understand, this is an elite Coast Guard unit that is primarily exists for operations like this. But of course, the Navy has ships in the region as well. What are your thoughts on that?
Sure. I mean, the Coast Guard takes the lead because under U.S. law, they also have law enforcement authorities, which the Navy usually does not. Of course, the U.S. Navy supported this operation with the Gerald Ford, the Navy's largest aircraft carrier in the vicinity. But the Coast Guard takes the lead and has has a highly trained unit in particular to engage in this kind of operation. So that in itself is not unusual. What is unusual is that there are over 15,000 U.S. service members and massive buildup of military assets in the region. Of course, and this is within the context of ongoing military strikes against alleged low-level drug runners and engage regarding the lethal strikes against numerous boats. I think we're up to 22 at this point. That seem to be coming from Venezuela. So again, this is a piece in a much bigger picture, and it's interesting to see. I mean, it's is this for regime change? Is this really for oil? Is this really within a counter drug operation? I mean, this is the boarding of this tanker is not about drugs, right? It's about the illicit flow of oil. And again, legally, I think the administration is on firm ground there.
Yeah, and with regards to the oil, as we pointed out earlier, the U.S. has seized tankers before. I remember back in 2020, there was petroleum cargo that was forfeited from 4 different tankers, which was about $45 million in oil. And in 2021, there was a tanker, the Achilles, that was also similarly targeted. There was $111 million worth of petroleum on board that vessel that was seized. But what was interesting about those, Colonel, is that they were done through civil forfeiture proceedings. And this wasn't, although they were perhaps military operations, they went through the courts to get ultimately to keep the oil. The U.S. kept the oil, which I'm guessing is probably going to happen here as well.
I think that's the likely course of action here, is that the United States Coast Guard will provide this information to the Department of Justice. The Department of Justice will go back to admiralty courts for a civil forfeiture proceeding. I mean, again, this operation does seem pursuant to a warrant issued by a U.S. federal court. So again, this is civil law enforcement action within the context, though, of the largest U.S. buildup of U.S. forces in this region in a very, very long time. So, and again, but regarding the international law aspect of this, this tanker allegedly was flying a false flag. Vessels must be flying a flag of nationality, and apparently they were falsely flying one of Guyana. So, under the law of the sea, the United States also had the ability legal authority to board this vessel to check on its nationality. So again, this was on firm legal ground, but it's the policy implications. So we had Senator Rand Paul yesterday say, hey, look, it looks like the sporting, and he really mentioned the overall U.S. buildup of forces. Looks like we're inching toward war here. Well, I mean, Congress needs to be involved. Congress needs to authorize this if this is the right thing to do on behalf of the American people, instead of these piecemeal components.
Yeah, and it does seem, to your point, Colonel, that there is a bipartisan, at least, of lawmakers who are saying that if this is the course of action we are going to take, the United States, then Congress needs to be more fully involved in those decisions. And the context that you add there about, I suspect that because there have been recent actions in the region targeting Venezuela, that if this had happened in any other year, we probably wouldn't be talking about it as much, because, as we point out, this is not the first time the U.S. has seized an oil tanker, but because it goes with all the other actions that we've seen our military undertake in the region against Venezuela, that is why I think the focus is so heavy today, this morning, and the hours after that tanker was seized. Colonel Rachel Van Ellingham, thank you very much, ma'am, for being with us. We appreciate you.
Thank you.
Let's bring in CBS News national security contributor Samantha Vinograd to talk more about this. So, Sam, you heard my discussion there with the Colonel. What is your take on what's happened and perhaps the legalities surrounding this tanker seizure?
Well, this certainly does appear to be legal from a U.S. domestic law perspective, based upon the fact that a judge did issue a warrant for this action, and this highly specialized operation that utilized various parts of the U.S. federal government apparatus, U.S. Coast Guard, FBI, and others. It is notable, Vlad, that this operation is just one part of a multifaceted pressure campaign that the administration is implementing against Venezuela. We have this operation to seize this carrier carrying ostensibly Venezuelan oil. It is worth noting that the United States used to buy a lot of Venezuelan oil. Now China actually accounts for the vast majority, close to 80% of purchases of Venezuelan oil. So the United States is putting pressure on Venezuelan oil exports, which still do represent significant export revenue for Venezuela itself. Of course, President Trump has said he has authorized covert action in Venezuela for reasons unknown. We have the military buildup in the waters around Venezuela, the military strikes against alleged boats carrying drugs, and more. So we have to view this in the context of the broader pressure campaign, with the outstanding question being, what is the ultimate goal? Is it regime change? Is it to stop narcotics flows, or all of the above?
All right, Sam, the other big story that we're following, as you know, is the Secretary of Homeland Security, Kristi Noem, is testifying as part of the worldwide threats hearing. What have we learned from the DHS Secretary so far?
Well, Secretary Noem is testifying alongside other government officials. I was just listening to her testimony and opening statement alongside the National Counterterrorism Center director. And overall, Vlad, we have heard opening statements really focus on views of failed Biden-era policies in the areas of immigration and counter-narcotics, and a focus on President Trump's reversal of those perceived mistakes. There has been, at the outset of this hearing, a very heavy focus on the vetting of individuals that came into the United States during the Biden administration, and a misrepresentation of the vetting that was performed on, for example, Afghan nationals that came in under Operation Allies Welcome after the withdrawal from Afghanistan. but really a chorus and a refrain of accusations against the Biden administration about who was lawfully allowed into this country under the previous administration and who came here illegally and the threats that they pose to the American people.
Really interesting. We're going to obviously continue to track what the secretary is testifying to, Sam, and always appreciate your analysis. Thank you so much, my friend.
Now let's go live to CBS News senior White House correspondent Weijia Zhang. And Weijia, has the president said anything about what the U.S. plans to do with that oil?
Muga, the president answered this very question, although it's notable he wasn't exactly 100% definitive. Take a listen.
What happens to the oil on that ship?
Well, we keep it, I guess.
Where does it go? What port does it go to?
Well, you have to follow the tanker. You know, you're a good newsman. Just follow the tanker.
Do you know where
follow it. Get a helicopter. Follow the tanker.
Is it true it's going to?
But we're gonna. I assume we're gonna keep the.
So you heard him saying, I guess we're going to keep it. I assume we're going to keep it, but it leaves open questions about exactly what's going to happen to it. There's many other questions as well. For example, where are the crew members who were on board? Are they being held in U.S. custody, and what agency is holding them? And some are questioning the legality of this strike in the first place. Of course, we just heard from Charlie lay out the reasons why the administration says that this tanker was fair game. And it is because, according to the Attorney General, it was already on the sanction list for several years. And she claims that it was part of an illicit oil transporting network for foreign terrorists. But this is certainly an unusual move. And despite what the president said about keeping the oil, he did not elaborate on that, Mugo. We can tell you what Venezuela has said, and they are very concerned, calling it illegal, and also saying that it points out what they have said from the beginning, which is that the entire motivation for this aggression against Venezuela is actually to target their oil reserves.
And Weijia, we know the U.S. has been ramping up pressure on Venezuela and its leader, Nicolas Maduro. I want to play this flashback from the president's 60 Minutes interview just last month. So let's take a listen to what he had to say about Maduro, and then we'll get your take on the other side of things.
On Venezuela in particular, are Maduro's days as president numbered?
I would say, yeah. I think so, yeah.
So, Weijia, is this all part of an effort to oust Venezuela's president, Nicolas Maduro, from power?
Well, even though that is what the president told our Norah O'Donnell, it doesn't mean that he was calling for a regime change explicitly. He just said that he thought Maduro's numbers were limited. It is U.S. policy not to weigh in directly on whether leadership of a foreign nation should be changed. But certainly there is no doubt that he's ramping up pressure on Maduro and on Venezuela. And at least one Democrat, Senator Chris Van Hollen, is saying that he believes all of this is to force a regime change. And he is calling bluff on the president's and the administration's explanation for mounting up the military, for going after boats, for mulling over possible land strikes. Of course, Trump has said it is all to stop the illegal flow of drugs into the U.S., but Van Hollen says it's because they want to overturn the current government.
All right, Weijia Zhang, thank you so much for joining us today.
Let's return back to the escalation and the tension between the United States and Venezuela. The operation to seize an oil tanker involved multiple branches of the U.S. military, and CBS News has learned the administration is now contemplating similar missions. Joining us now to discuss is retired Navy Vice Admiral Robert Murrett. He's also the Deputy Director of Syracuse University's Institute for Security Policy and Law. Admiral, thank you so much for being with us.
Morning, Vlad. Good to be back with you.
Yes. So, Admiral, it would seem to me that there need to be a lot of coordination in advance for an operation like this. And as I pointed out to Charlie D'Agata, our national security correspondent, this is not the first time that the United States has seized an oil tanker on the high seas. They've done it with Iranian vessels, and oftentimes the U.S. is able to hold on to the oil from those vessels that they seize. But what is your take on how this operation went down?
Yeah, a couple of points, Vlad. Just briefly, I would mention that first, it was a successful operation. This is what we call in the business VBSS, which stands for Visit, Board, Search, and Seizure, a core mission for the Coast Guard and also the supporting forces that participated in this. So it's certainly not a new thing going back to, for example, even the tanker wars in the Middle East in the 1980s. So a core mission, one that was done successfully because there was no resistance by the crew, which is typically the case because they're very international or not really interested in having any kind of kinetic activities on the ship. So a good operation, and one that as a policy choice was probably something on the menu that the administration has, which was looked at favorably.
So as the U.S. has continued to build its military presence in the region, you've warned of the need for clarity. What do you think we are not seeing? And I wonder if the clarity means to the American people, to Congress, to both. What should the president and the administration and the Secretary of Defense be upfront to the American people about?
Yeah, I think we'd agree that we'd want clarity to all of those people and also to the regime in Venezuela so that they understand what's happening too. And I would point out along those lines, there was a fair amount of clarity in terms of the nature of this operation, which was very different from what we've been doing so far. This was a law enforcement operation. The Coast Guard had the lead for it. And there was a warrant for the illegal activity that was being done by the tanker in question. And also, it's also worth noting that the announcement of it came from the Attorney General, the Department of Justice. So this is different in character from some of the other things we've seen, and one that, as you're saying, Vlad, is very consistent with the kinds of, again, VBSS operations that we've conducted in the past.
So let me ask you, and this is asking more for speculation coupled with your experience and your analysis, Admiral, but before it had announced that it seized the skipper of this tanker, the administration, of course, was taking heat over that September double tap strike. And I wonder, there's been a lot of conflicting messages. Some reporting that's been done that suggests that the Secretary of Defense gave some type of order surrounding, should an issue like that come up in a military operation. The admiral who was in charge of that operation said that he gave that order for that double tap. But I wonder if the messaging from the Secretary of Defense wasn't as it has been since Secretary Hegseth took on this role. If you were conducting this operation and you saw two guys floating in the ocean, or somebody who has been trained in military justice and ethics and understands the laws of combat, would that have been something that you might have done?
Yeah, Vlad, I don't want to speculate on the particulars here. I've not seen the video of before the second strike took place. But what I would say, Vlad, is that these kinds of counter-personnel actions from unmanned aircraft are certainly nothing new. And there were, during my own time in active duty, plenty of very difficult decisions made by commanders with some time pressure relative to second and third strikes for different kinds of things that took place, primarily during the late noughts. Like I would say they probably peaked between 2006 and 2010. And these are tough decisions and ones that certainly deserve to be investigated and we learn lessons from. But I wouldn't want to second guess the commander in this one because I haven't really seen the details of the video.
Yeah, no, that's the fine line that even journalists have to sort of walk, right? Because we might not understand the full context. We haven't seen the video. The Pentagon has yet to release the video, so it's hard to know. But you make a good point about the commanders on the ground, the ones carrying out the operations, ultimately having to make the decisions that they make. And with all the years of experience that they have, we entrust our military commanders to make the right decisions and the right calls. Bob Murrett, thank you very much for coming on, sir. Always good to have you.
As you probably know, we've just seized a tanker on the coast of Venezuela, a large tanker, very large. Largest one ever seized, actually.
The United States is ramping up its military operations off the coast of Venezuela, and this time seizing an oil tanker. Take a look at this new video to our monitors here showing that operation. President Donald Trump confirmed the operation during a roundtable with tech leaders just yesterday. Now, this is the first U.S. seizure of an oil cargo from Venezuela. It's also the Trump administration's first known action against a Venezuela-related tanker since ordering a massive military buildup in the Caribbean. Venezuela is now accusing the U.S. of, quote, blatant theft and international piracy. CBS News senior national security correspondent Charlie D'Agata has those details.
Venezuela has condemned the seizure of its oil tankers, international piracy, and brazen theft. We're learning that Russian President Vladimir Putin, in a phone call with Venezuela's Nicolas Maduro, expressed solidarity with the Venezuelan people. Some Democratic lawmakers are expressing concern. Senator Rand Paul saying it sounds a lot like the beginning of a war. Chris Coons says he is gravely concerned Trump is sleepwalking us into a war with Venezuela. And certainly seizing that oil tanker yesterday has taken tensions with Venezuela to a whole new level. We're learning more of what looks like a multi-agency operation with the backup of the U.S. military, the FBI, and Homeland Security were involved, and elite Coast Guard Special Operations Forces called Maritime Security Response Teams, including sailors and Marines from the USS Gerald R. Ford aircraft. That's the largest and most advanced aircraft carrier in the world. They all took part. Officials tell us the interdiction took place without incident. That's a military term. No injuries to anyone, including the crew of the tanker. Is reportedly full of oil and is headed to Cuba. We've tracked that tanker as it entered the Caribbean from the Middle East, from the Far East. And the U.S. has sanctioned Venezuela's oil companies for years, but this specific tanker was seized because it was on the U.S. Treasury's Department's specially designated nationals list for carrying that sanctioned oil from places like Venezuela and Iran, though that was under a different name. And Attorney General Pam Bondi says that makes that ship a legitimate target. So this is all part of the pressure campaign against Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro and his government, in addition to sanctions, dozens of strikes on suspected drug boats, and that massive military buildup that gets bigger by the day. President Trump saying Maduro's days are numbered, and he has not ruled out a land invasion. And despite those sanctions, there are plenty more oil tankers going in and out of Venezuela. Back to you.
Charlie D'Agata there. Thank you. Let's go live now to the White House and CBS News White House reporter Willie James Inman. Willie James, thanks for your time today. Did the president say what the U.S. plans to do with the oil?
Hey there, Mugo. Well, the president did touch on the situation off the coast of Venezuela with the U.S. taking possession of this large oil tanker. The president said is one of the largest seizures ever of this type of oil tanker. But he did touch on potentially what we could see next, but also the situation at hand. Take a listen to what the president said yesterday. Okay, I'm told that we don't have that sound from the president, but he did say that we'll keep it, I guess, and a reporter in the room asked him where does it go, what port it would go to, and the president simply said that you'll have to follow the tanker. So certainly this is a situation in which the U.S. Appears to have escalated this push against Nicolas Maduro, the leader of Venezuela. Of course, we know that the U.S., the president in particular, has blasted Maduro, essentially saying that he's the head of a drug cartel. We, of course, know that oil is a big moneymaker for Venezuela. So the U.S. taking possession of this sanctioned oil tanker certainly is a escalation of sorts. It's unclear what happens with the oil, but the president seemingly saying that we'll potentially keep it. But it's unclear what will happen next from there, though, Mugo.
Yeah, and Willie James, you obviously mentioned Venezuela's President Nicolas Maduro there. Is this all part of an effort to remove him from power?
Well, the president has been asked this multiple times, including this week in an interview with Politico, but he was also asked this question by our own reporter, I should say, on 60 Minutes. He was talking to about this situation, I should say, in terms of what could potentially happen to Maduro. Take a listen.
On Venezuela in particular, are Maduro's days as president numbered?
I would say, yeah. I think so, yeah.
So that's Nora O'Donnell there, of course, the correspondent for 60 Minutes, asking the president that question in terms of what happens to Maduro. The president has demurred in terms of regime change, in terms of if Nicolas Maduro would perhaps stay in power. And the president hasn't ruled out military escalation in terms of striking those military targets, those drug cartels in Venezuela, those land strikes. So the president hasn't ruled out that option, but oftentimes when he gets asked this question about whether or not Maduro will stay in power or if the U.S. wants to take him out of power, he essentially demurs, doesn't want to necessarily give away or play all of his cards, or show all of his cards rather, in terms of what he will do next. But certainly a change of action coming here from this administration with the seizure of this oil tanker. The president yesterday said that Colombia could be next. We, of course, know that the president has targeted these nations in large part because of the drug operations the U.S. alleges that are taking place in those nations. Mugo.
All right, Willie James Inman at the White House for us today. Thank you.